dan makmur, kerana rakyat membela kedaulatan. Tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku. Malaysia damai dan merdeka, sepanjang zaman semangat rakyatmu cekal. Tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku. Malaysia, ibu pertiwiku, dirahmati oleh Yang Maha Esa. Tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku, tanah airku. Petang Isnin atau kemarin, kau duduk termenung macam si majenin. Sebatang dua kretek dah pening, hati resah, oh tegak kering. Setitik peluh di dahi melambangkan satu memori. Tapi engkau memang tak peduli tentang mengejar hal-hal duniawi. Bukan sebab engkau malas atau tak larat memintas, cuma dada engkau mengulas, terfikir tentang hal menindas, menindas, menindas. Menindas, menindas. Malam Ahad atau Rabu, sama saja kalau merapu. Setegur buat hatimu sayu. Hidupnya ni takkan kau layu. Kalau layan ikut angin, nescaya akan teringin. Kalau kemponan dan dingin, bosan membujang ingin berkelamin. Asal niat itu teguh, bukan menurut nak riuh. Laksanakanlah, oh sungguh, semoga kau tak jadi penindas, 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 penindas. Sedunia menanti, pergi keluar, pergilah cari bagai juara dan inti. Kau dah uzur, belum pun dapat seberumur. Usang muda niat tak terluhur, di akhirat kau memohon. Tak ditindas, ditindas, tak ditindas, ditindas. Ditindas, ditindas, tak ditindas, ditindas.
We are live now, right? Is it? Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for tuning in to the discussion tonight. The discussion is organized by Aliran, entitled State, Society and Economy in Transition, Whither Malaysia. Happening on such an important day, actually. It's Malaysia Day today, 16 September, in marking the establishment of the Malaysia as a federation. It's actually an apt moment to discuss where we are now as a society. So to kickstart the discussion today, allow me to introduce myself. I am Zikri Rahman, an Aliran member, and also a cultural worker and an independent researcher, and I will be the moderator for our session today. Before we start, I would love to briefly introduce Aliran. Aliran is an organization which has been formed in 1977 and has been active since then. It is Malaysia's first multi-ethnic reform movement dedicated to justice, freedom, and solidarity. Aliran has been commenting critically on various social issues, offers analysis as well as alternative ideas to planting the seeds of public awareness in regards to critical political, economic, and social issues. Aliran can be accessed via different platforms. We are active on Facebook to Twitter. And of course, we also have our own Telegram channel right now. And of course, we have been active via our website as well. So we are so honored actually today to have such a caliber panelist on board with all of us here today to discuss and to share their thoughts about what happened in Malaysia right now and where we are going. So it goes without saying that the discussion today will provide us with the much needed engagement and contextualization as a society to brave through the conundrum that we are collectively facing today. So without further ado, I would love to kindly introduce our lineup for the discussion today. First, we have Dr. Azmil Tayeb. He's the current Aliran Honorary Secretary. And of course, he's also a political scientist attached with University Science Malaysia and has done extensive research on political Islam, social movements, and local government politics, particularly in Indonesia and Malaysia. So we are going to hear a lot about like what kind of political orientation that has been developed throughout these recent years from him afterwards. And secondly, we have Dr. Prema Devaraj. She's the Aliran Honorary Assistant Secretary and of course, Aliran's first former women's president in 2016 for 3 years. She has been working in the field of gender and child rights for almost over 20 years now. For much of this time, she was attached to the Women's Center for Change, which based in Penang. So she has been working in different capacities as a trainer, program director, and program consultant. And for the past few years, she has moved into consultancy work and on working on gender and child rights. So the third panelist that we have today is Dr. Khoo Ying Hooi. She's the Aliran Executive Committee member and also the co-editor for the website. She's also the head and senior lecturer at the Department of International and Strategic Studies, University of Malaya. She completed a PhD in politics and government, examining social movements and democratization with a focus on Malaysia's Bersih movements. Her recent publication on Bersih entitled The Bersih Movement and Democratization in Malaysia has been published in 2020. And last but not least, we also have Dr. Terence Gomez. He's an Aliran member. And of course, he's a professor of political economy at the Faculty of Economics and Administration, University of Malaya. He has held different appointments at the University of Leeds and Murdoch University and served as a visiting professor at Kobe University in Japan, the University of Michigan, and also the University of California, San Diego. Between 2005 and 2008, he served as a research coordinator at the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. So as you can see here today, we have a diverse panelist with us today. But then again, before we proceed, I would love to convey my apology on behalf of Aliran because our fifth panelist wouldn't able to make it today, Dr. Andrew Area, because he has a sudden personal problem that couldn't be avoided. So so coming back to the topic of our discussion today, after I introduce all of our panelists today, I guess we can have an in-depth discussion with the panelists, very excellent panelists that we have today. So in this regard, maybe if I'm going to proceed with the discussion today, like a probing questions, if I may put it that way, how can we actually situate our current situations, where we are in right now, and where do we go from here? Actually, will the new Umno-led government headed by the 9th Prime Minister Ismail Sabri actually able to usher in a more democratic, inclusive, and prosperous Malaysia for all via his ideas, or maybe we can say rhetorics as of now of Keluarga Malaysia, for example. So maybe I would love to invite our first speakers, Dr. Azmil. Maybe he can actually start with giving us some insights of how the political situations in Malaysia or social or economic situation in Malaysia, maybe let's say in 5 years to come, based on the current situation that we are in right now. Because we can see like from the recent political situation from Pakatan Harapan's to PN and now the UMNO-led government, there's so much political consolidation that happened. So maybe you can provide a little bit of insight on that just a quick reminder on that. We're going to have a 10 to 15 minutes for the first session. And then for those who's tuning in tonight, please be ready with your questions, because we're going to go straight to the second slot, which is the Q&A, before we ended up with the closing remarks from our panelists. So I would love to invite Dr. Azmil to give a thought. All right, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Saudara Zikri. Good evening and salam sejahtera everyone who's attending our talk tonight. I'm honored to be here, to be part of this discussion. So as Zikri has mentioned, about the what can we expect, right, in the next 5 years. But I would like to start our talk tonight with just a reflection, because I think this is a Malaysia Day today. I think a lot of people might not have maybe reflected that much about what it means to be a Malaysian, right? I mean, we celebrate this every year. When we go abroad, for example, we always introduce ourselves as Malaysians, or when we introduce ourselves to foreigners, we say, "Oh, I'm Malaysian." But what exactly does it mean to be a Malaysian? I mean, it's something that I think that a lot of us take for granted, right? So especially when all of us, have various identities within us, right? So we're not just Malaysian, we're also Malays, Indians, Chinese, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, man, woman. So we have these nested identities within us, like this Russian Matryoshka doll. So being Malaysian is just one of our identities, right? And competing with other identities that we have. So I think I would like to take this opportunity on Malaysian Day to ask, people who are here tonight, especially our audience, to reflect what it means to be Malaysian. I think we can delve deeper into this, right? And specifically, our identity in relation with others, right? So not just our own individual identity, but how our identity relate with other people, because we are all part of this Malaysian community, this Malaysian project, right? So what does it mean, if we put it in that context, So I think we can, for this, I'd like to focus on two particular topics. So first, I mean, we cannot avoid this 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? So the ethno-religious politics that we currently practice and see and witness in Malaysia right now, it's unavoidable, because we cannot talk about the socio-political economic conditions in Malaysia without touching on the ethno-religious aspect of it. And second, I think this is also usually marginalized in the discourse, is the Borneo, right? The Sabah and Sarawak East Malaysia. And especially Hari Malaysia, right? This is a day for us to celebrate the union of West Malaysia, the Peninsula, Sabah and Sarawak, right? But outside of Hari Malaysia, it seems Sabah and Sarawak kind of like on the sideline, right? And in various indicators, I guess, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to, it's at the bottom of the rank, right? So I would like to touch a bit on Sabah and Sarawak, on Borneo, especially particularly Sarawak. Just since Dr. Andrew Area couldn't make it tonight, so, and because he was supposed to be talking about the conditions or the perspective of the East Malaysian. So I'll be touching a little bit more, just a bit, just broadly on what's going on there, especially in the context of our current situation. And also Dr. Terence Gomez, I think, will also maybe touch it a little bit as well, from the political economy aspect of it. So let's go to the peninsula first. And as I mentioned, I want to focus on the ethno-religious politics that we see right now. right? And we see that, particularly in the 22 months of the Pakatan Harapan government, we see the peak of ethno-religious politics in Malaysia, right? You can see all these various issues that flared up. The Seafield Temple issue, the Rome Statute, what's the other one? So all these things, yeah. So and then we see those issues suddenly disappeared, right? When PN took over. So we don't see as much, the frequency of that suddenly almost like it never happened. But also at the same time, we see, especially now, the kind of government that we have, the kind of political competition that we witness right now, we can see that there's fragmentation, right? Especially amongst the Malay electorates, the Malay political parties, the Malay Islamic political parties, right? So because you have UMNO, even within UMNO, there's fragmentation, and you have Bersatu, you have Amanah, and then you have PAS, of course, and then to a lesser extent, PKR. So I think this is, as the saying goes, there's always opportunity in crisis, right? So some people might look at it as this crisis, the crisis within the Malay politics in Malaysia, because some of the rhetorics that we hear saying that the Malays right now are divided, there are infightings among so there's no Malay unity. Unlike what we see, during the Pakatan Harapan government, this called the Muafakat Nasional, the call for Malay Islamic Muslim unity, and suddenly now when they're in power, and all that, went through the window. So you see this, but to me, I would like to offer another perspective, maybe, because since we were assessing the current situation, and we're trying to figure out where this is heading to, in the next few years, I would like to offer the perspective that maybe this is a good thing, right? Maybe the whole idea of having this mythical Malay Islamic unity is not necessarily good, right? Especially when you're talking about Keluarga Malaysia, right? As the current Prime Minister new slogan, right? So I think we should look at this as, this is a way to reconfigure the political status quo that we have in Malaysia right now. I think it goes back to the saying, there's opportunity in crisis, right? So in this case, it's opportunity for change. So there's no requirement that says that we need to continue with the old ways of doing things, right? Especially right now, because everything is in flux and everything is in transition. So it's up in the air. There's no certainty. Yes, right now, the opposition signed an MOU with the government. This bipartisanship cooperation with all the slew of reforms included in this MOU, which is an encouraging sign, right? But then we don't know if that's just an alliance of convenience, or it is going to be sustained well into the future. That remains to be seen, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that we should look at this, this state of uncertainty, this state of transition, this state of flux, as an opportunity to reconfigure, revamp, overhaul the old political status quo that we see in Malaysia, that we've been experiencing in Malaysia, for the past few decades, including especially the ethno-religious politics that's been polarizing our society for the longest time, right? Sharpening the divide between Malays and non-Malays, between Muslims and non-Muslims. Then I think this is a great time, so especially if the government that we have right now showing a good faith in trying to heal the wounds, between these different groups in the society, I think there's no better time than the time of crisis that we have right now. When you can rally people, especially against a common enemy, which is a pandemic. I think definitely that transcend all this, ethno-religious, these primordial differences, between different groups of people in the society. So I think that's the perspective that I offer. Okay, and then the second one that I want to focus on is East Malaysia, Borneo. So I'm just going to touch broadly on this because this is not my area of specialization. Even though I've spent quite a bit of time in Sabah, especially Sarawak, for research, and I've visited East Malaysia quite a few times over the years, and I have some familiarity, with both states. But just, I want to touch broadly because I think especially it's Hari Malaysia, and I think it's really important for us to include East Malaysia as part of our discussion and the broader discourse, so no longer sideline East Malaysia, as like step brothers, step siblings, maybe, so. And one is, the issue that came up, especially when the Sarawakian parties, playing the role of kingmakers, right, in the formation of this new government, is the demands for more autonomy, right? So the issue of the Malaysian Agreement 63, MA 63, crop up again, right? So demanding for more autonomy. So I think this is also something that, I can definitely empathize. I think all of us can empathize what's going on in Borneo, because they're lagging behind in development. They're lagging behind in all indicators, socioeconomic indicators, right? They're always at the bottom rank of, all indicators. So definitely you can understand the frustration, that's going on over there. But what exactly does autonomy means, right? So does this autonomy means that it only will benefit the small group of elites, local elites in Sabah and Sarawak, particularly in Sarawak, who have been benefiting from the federal government for the longest time, right? So maybe this is an opportunity for them to actually gain a bigger share of the loot, so to speak. Yes, I think, and also, those who are demanding for autonomy in East Malaysia have to clarify, right? What exactly does it mean? With what comes with that autonomy, what rights, should be clarified, right? And what does it mean to have this autonomy in relation with living with other Malaysians, right? Especially those in the peninsula, right? Sometimes, if I can be honest, right? When I go to Sabah and Sarawak, we have to, to go through the immigration, right? The passport control. The whole idea of having to show your passport or your IC to go to another state within the same country is almost is absurd, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? So I think in a way, this is the, I think it brings back to the question, what does it mean to be a Malaysian in this context, right? So is it okay to have your own country within the country, right? So, and then the question that does increased autonomy will actually help to solve the problems, the acute problems that we see in Sarawak, particularly Sabah and Sarawak, right? Because we know, for one, there's a high unemployment rate over there, right? And then there's a high degree of brain drain, for example. You have more people from Sabah and Sarawak coming to the peninsula to find jobs, right? So does it mean if they have more autonomy, more people that Sarawak and Sarawakians and Sabahans, Sabahans in Peninsula will move back to East Malaysia? So these are the things that I think we should, think further, when we think about what does it mean to be autonomy? What does it mean for East Malaysia to be part of this Malaysian project? So does this autonomy actually conflict with the whole idea of nationhood here in Malaysia? And also for people in Peninsular Malaysia to have more empathy on what's going on over in East Malaysia, right? So I think this is all part of this reflection that we should. Then we can discuss this later on during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Azmil, for that. I guess it is very important for us to kickstart our discussion with some kind of reflection, because with reflection, we can at least see a much better insight of what's happening on the ground, for example. So thank you so much for giving us, some kind of ideas about like what really happened with the ethnocentric development, or, the ethno-nationalism that happens in Malaysia political situation right now, and of course like the situation in Sabah and Sarawak. But then again, building from what you have been saying about the opportunity in crisis, which I believe that's how we actually continue our imagination on how Malaysia should be as a society, right? And that maybe Dr. Prema can actually provide us with that, because you're going to talk more about like the development of civil society at large. So maybe Dr. Prema, if you want to go next. You're on mute, actually. All right.
Okay, thanks, Zikri. Hello, everyone, and Selamat Hari Malaysia. I'm just going to share some slides with you. Okay, yeah. Oh. How did that happen? Hang on. Okay, let's see if it works this time. It won't let me do a slideshow. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
okay.
we can.
Okay, so I can't work the slideshow. I'm so sorry. So you'll just have to look at this. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of civil society organizations and the role they've played in democratization in Malaysia. And I really want to look at how people have participated over the years. So really in framing my observations, I have to confess that, I'm going back almost 35 years, because I do remember Operation Lalang days. I do remember, people being detained under the ISA and how difficult it was for NGOs, human rights NGOs, to try and operate under that climate. So in moving forward, 30 years on, we find ourselves, here. Definitely, you can see so many more groups, so many different CSOs. They used to be called NGOs, but you've got CSOs, and you definitely have more coalitions. And in these groups and in these coalitions, you do see more women and more youth, not only just taking part, but playing key roles. Yeah. And yes, the calls for human rights continue. But over the last 10 years or so, you've seen much more emphasis on environmental issues, climate change, inclusiveness, accountability, the call for better education. And over the last couple of years, especially with the handling of the COVID-19, we've had calls from civil society for competency. So the role civil society has played in raising awareness on issues. It has raised people's awareness on the inequalities and the injustices in society. And I just wanted to share some recent civil society efforts which have been reported in the news. So it's not just protests and online petitions. We also have CSOs working on very broad coalitions, on very broad platforms to address some issues. And also with all the politicking over the last 18 months, you know, the Rakyat and also the CSOs have called for inter-party ceasefire agreements. And this happened sometime middle of last year. And, you know, it was an impetus and to what we have now, which was just recently signed just a couple of days ago, our MOU on the transformation and political stability. So the role of CSOs in putting new ideas forward, in getting issues raised, I mean, that cannot be denied, and I see more of it as time goes on. So in terms of moving forward, if we want to look at, you know, what's the future have in store, then I think we need to also think about what is the context in which CSOs are working now. And just if we just look at where we are now today, you know, politically, we've had 3 different governments since 2018, and we've just signed the MOU, as I've mentioned. We have the list of existing issues which people go on about, you know, from human rights violations to ethno-religious politics and corruption. We have all that, okay? But we also have the COVID-19 experience. And it has been very different for different sectors in society. And for, you know, for many people, it has been just very traumatic and very difficult. And so if we look at poverty, you know, we know from DOSM's data that, you know, there is really a rise in poor households. You know, we've seen about 12% of T20s move into the M40 category. We've seen M40 categories moving to B40s and B40s suffering even more. And with the poverty will, of course, come malnutrition, and, you know, how this is going to affect society post-COVID is something else. We have huge unemployment. Some figure from DOSM was about 4.8%, which translates into almost 750,000 people being unemployed. And the SOCSO insurance scheme gives figures of over 40,000 people have lost employment this year. And their average is about 5,800 jobs are lost a month. EPF tells us that, you know, people have removed a lot of their savings during this COVID-19 pandemic. And so, you know, just over half of the EPF members have less than 50,000 for their retirement. And of course, we are seeing awful figures on suicides. You know, recent statistics suggest it's about 3 a day nationwide. So the country is in pain. The country actually needs healing on so many different levels. And so when we look at CSOs and we talk about democratization and we talk about, you know, how they're going to work, this is the context in which CSOs have to take into consideration, apart from, you know, their particular areas of work. So in moving forward, we have to take into consideration recovery from the pandemic, a government which is not very stable, but, you know, there seems to be some agreement for stability at the moment. And we have a G15 right round the corner, you know, next year. So, sorry about that. Yeah. So when we look at the role of CSOs and CSIs, and I've put here you and me because very often it's very easy to sit back and say, you know, let the NGOs handle it, or, you know, blame the politicians for something. But I think, you know, each of us have a vested interest in creating the Malaysia we want. You know, so it is something which I think is very important. And I think all of us have to really look at what we can do to create the kind of Malaysia we want. So in working towards change, and I put there healing as well, because I think the country really needs this. We're looking at, you know, what kind of a shared vision would we have for a Malaysia in the future? And, you know, how do we get this vision? How do we get people invested in this vision and wanting to be included? So we need to think about how we can do this. And part of having this shared vision also is about building solidarity among the various groups which exist in our society. You know, very often CSOs have a very specific focus and they become very specialized in an area. But I think we need to also broaden that to have the solidarity because of the intersectionality of issues, you know. And so, you know, we need to understand the different systems at play which cause the oppression and cause the discrimination. So the building of solidarity I see as something, you know, if we look forward over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it's something we need to look at. And then also the whole concept of, you know, including people. Very often, you know, if you look at the newspapers, you would think that, you know, activism was just in the Klang Valley, or, you know, NGOs were just in Penang. So how it's reported is one issue, but the other issue is how we include people in this kind of activism. And so it is youth, it is women, it is the disabled, it is our Orang Asli, it is our friends in Sabah and Sarawak, you know. So how do we include more people, and the language we use, you know. I should be speaking in Bahasa Malaysia, really. So we need to look at that, you know, how we include more people in our work towards change. And in this working towards change, I think in the field of activism, in the way we move forward, I think we need to look at the kind of change makers we have in society with us. So no longer would civil society organizations just focus on people who have the vision or, you know, are able to articulate the issues. We also need other people. We need people who are like frontline responders, people who are able to get down on the ground and go and see what's happening. And we saw many of that during COVID-19. We saw the best of Malaysians reaching across and helping others, you know. So we need to embrace frontliners in that sense. You know, we need to bring in different types of activists. So they could be artists, they could be filmmakers, they could be cartoonists, they could be puppeteers. So when we look at democratizing in the future, when we look at building the movement for change, so many more people can be included, and the movement needs to be made more accessible. And if we allow this, you know, and if we encourage this, then it just makes it so much more richer. The other thing which has really, for me, which has really grown is the whole social media and online activism that we see. And I've put here the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there are many sides to online activism. And of course, the good would be that, you know, we are able to reach people so quickly, and we are able to reach our brothers and sisters in Sabah and Sarawak, where before having a meeting would be a huge issue. Now we can do it so quickly. So the broader reach, the quicker reach, that's great. What's not so good about this online activism is, you know, sometimes it is an issue of digital literacy, digital accessibility. And there is a slight worry on my part anyway, that, you know, this kind of activism needs to be grounded. So we run the risk of not being grounded if we only just work online. And of course, the ugly is the harassment women activists have faced online. And it's very negative, it's very toxic. And the ugly is also the misinformation which is sent out online. So as we send what we would say correct information or good information, you know, for a campaign, there are also there's also an opportunity for wrong type of information to go out quickly. So that's, you know, so there are plus and minuses when we're looking at social media, online activism, and this will grow over time. And the other issue I want to talk about is when in moving forward, very much like Azmil said, you know, in a time of crisis, it is also a time of change. And we have to think about how we want to harness this change and look at different opportunities which arise. And so we have a government which is not so stable, and it might then just present the opportunities for civil society organizations to put forward ideas and ways forward. And politicians will have to listen because, you know, of the desperate situation they are in. So it's important that we identify different ways of pushing the agenda for democracy, for change, for healing forward. And so within all this, you know, so you have your CSOs, your CSIs, you have you and me, and we have a shared vision, or working towards a shared vision of what Malaysia could be. I think we also would have to be pushing for much better leaders. I mean, leaders with integrity, leaders who are connected to issues on the ground, leaders who can compete professionally, and leaders who will not engage in toxic politics. And so we need to push this kind of thinking forward. And we also want to look at the kind of policies which we have in the country. And these policies need to be policies which are just. These policies need to be policies which include social protection for those who are, you know, for the vulnerable and for those who are marginalized. So we need to have this kind of thinking. And so as we move forward, you know, for a better Malaysia, for a different Malaysia from what we have today, I think it is also important to have with us, you know, good governance principles, so that, you know, we are accountable in what we do, we are transparent in what we do, and we have integrity in what we do. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of moving forward, but I think it is possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prema, for those insights. I guess it is very helpful because we know that democratization has always been messy. When you mentioned about shared vision, there's always a competing visions of what exactly is democracy is. So before we move forward to Dr. Ying Hooi, we actually have 3 questions already on the chat box. So maybe our panelists can have a look and try to respond accordingly later in the next session. So with Dr. Ying Hooi, I guess she's going to focus more on the civic space and of course to elaborate further on the questions of the civil society movement in Malaysia. So yeah, please, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zikri. Good evening to everyone. Well, I think this week is a very exciting week for Malaysia as the parliament ends on this month in September, where I think since the January this year, you know, when the state of emergency was declared, and then we know, you know, many civil societies, many of us have been calling for, you know, to restore the parliamentary democracies, and the parliamentary democracy has been highly criticized as well on how we actually exercise it here in Malaysia. And I think this week is also the very first week that we witness our ninth Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Ismail Sabri, in the parliaments. And I think these parliament sessions will be very significant as we are going to also hear about the 12 Malaysia plan. So I think on the Mondays, as we see, you know, from the King, he has sent a message to all the MPs that, you know, not to gamble with the future of the countries for the political self-interest, and that the politicians should actually honor their sworn duty to put the people first. I think this is a reminder that most of the civil society groups too have raised over the years and repeatedly. And however, I think this is something that we see somehow our politicians unfortunately have disappointed us in many ways. especially if I were to do a little bit of analysis throughout these COVID-19 periods, and also perhaps started off from the 2018. And this week also, we also hear of the Memorandum of Understanding on the Transformation and Political Stability, the MOU signed between the government and the Pakatan Harapan, that, you know, there's many people saying that, you know, will this mark a new turning point for Malaysia, as in, you know, we should encourage for the bipartisans or multi-partisans kind of network and coalitions and collaborations. So I think, but however, this part of the collaboration is not new yet. I think finally it is being put in place. So there's a lot of things that we can observe, and what are the trend is going to be. So if we look at the MOU, there are several components with the COVID-19 plan: governance transformation, parliamentary reforms, ensuring judicial independence, the Malaysia Agreement 1963, and the formations of steering committees. I think all these demands have been raised since during the Pakatan Harapan's time. So we look at their election manifestos. So some of these are still ongoing. Nevertheless, some might question why now and not before. Can this MOU bring about any changes to our politics really? So I must say I might not have all the answer here, but I wish to offer some thoughts over here on today's seminar. So the questions here is that, you know, as the title showed up, are we in transition? So I would say we have been in transition for so long. You know, we have been, you know, whenever there's a general elections, whenever there's a special event, then we always say, you know, we are in the transitions to another point of time. And I still remember vividly the hype that everyone had, including myself, in May 2018, when the Pakatan Harapan administration actually took over the Barisan Nasional. And I will be lying if I say I don't feel disappointed with the series of events since then until today that have been taken place in the country. Yet at the same time, I must say that democratization can be messy. I think Zikri just now was mentioning that, you know, democracy can be very messy, and there's no absolute destinations for us, including even if you're in a fully democratic countries, the political tussles and things like that will still happen. Nevertheless, I think what I would like to highlight is that what's more frustrating is the lineup of the politicians that we have in the country. From the reactions to the MOU, I must say that the trust deficits to the politicians is real, and it is increasing. And it is not only targeted to our governments, it is also the same goes to our opposition political parties as well. So, you know, this is such a landmark kind of MOU, but I think the reactions that the public actually give is not as high as it should be there. You know, I mean, it is something that is not really common in the context of Malaysia. So I think for me, this is a huge challenge, not only for the governments today, but also for the oppositions, since we are also wanting to talk about, you know, the next general election, which is not far away from us. So while our journey to democracy and political maturity can be complicated, I think to some extent, we all know the changes can take times, and nevertheless, some of the political dramas today could be avoided if we have politicians with high integrity. I think those are the real issues that we face, even since the Pakatan Harapan until today, after now we have Ismail Sabri. So this then leads to the focus of my sharing today, with the challenge of the trust deficit to the politicians, and including the whole machinery of how Malaysia is being operated. What is the future of Malaysia, and where are we heading? And I have always liked the terms of people power, but I would say many will say this is naive, and this is not happening in Malaysia. But I am true believer that, you know, in the end of the day, we're talking about the people. So I hold strongly with these principles. And today I'll be sharing a little bit on my observations on social movements and protest politics. And this is very much related to the trust deficits that is happening. So I think Malaysia has become such a distinctive case for the discussions when we talk about social movements and also the democratizations. I will not repeat what Dr. Prema has mentioned before. Rather, I would like to provide some preliminary analysis of the more recent trends of the civil disobedience that happened. So with a focus on the civic space. So when I talk about the civic space here, mostly I would like to focus on the freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and so forth. And I think the repressions is quite significant in the at least for this year and the last year. So we see the civic space is being restricted disproportionately using the legislations under the name of COVID-19. I would say this is not only happening in Malaysia, but casting across the region in Southeast Asia. Many governments, especially semi-democracies or authoritarian nature of the governments, will use the legislations under the name of COVID-19 in terms of curbing the dissenting voices. So first, I have a few points here. First, if we look at the most of the protests that happens in recent years, recently during the COVID times, it is all related to the management of the COVID with the policies that is not consistent and also and so forth. And I think we also witness an increased usage of a hashtag that reflects the dissatisfactions of the societies when the civic space is being curtailed under the pandemic. For instance, I think we see lawan, kerajaan gagal, keluar dan lawan are very popular among netizens, and the countries I must say that the emergencies allow the government to actually halt the parliaments back then in January 2021, and it was being used by the PN governments under Muhyiddin to avoid the vote of confidence, and basically that itself showcased a general distrust in the public as they have been deprived of accountable government from time to time. And of course, when we talk about social movements, it exists based on response to something. And I would say, looking at the trends of the social movements here, it tends to be more reactive. And I think this is something that that very important. Reactive attitude it is not something that it's not sustainable, I must say. Yeah. So, but if we look at the movements that are happening here in Malaysia, it is mostly reactive, and of course, there are many reasons for that. And but I think during the COVID times, there is this trend that the counter movements is not really significant. Yeah. So perhaps that is something that we can look for, because if we look at during the Bersih times and during that particular period, the past 10 years, the counter movements can be quite significant. But I say perhaps during the COVID, that's why I say legislations can be very dangerous when we talk. And I must say during the COVID time, it is not only the legislation that related to COVID-19 is being used, but there are many other legislations such as the Communication Act and the Sedition Act and so forth. And it is always being used to say that, because it is a COVID times and we shouldn't have any kind of protest and so forth. And I think the second trend that I would like to share is that the protesters come from different levels of groups. I know there's a lot of focus on the youth group. I would not really entirely agree with that, because I think there are quite a lot of silent groups that are not out, but they also shown their dissatisfaction. But it might not be the media, it doesn't mean they are happy with the governments of today as well. And I think the Hatal Doctor contract is really significant in this case. And it is, when professional march, when lawyers march, it is something that it is a signal to show that, something is not right in the countries. And on a more positive note, I think in my notes, actually, I would like to also point out about the spirit of solidarity. But since Dr. Prema has already mentioned that, I will not go much in depth into it. But I will say this solidarity under hashtags such as Kita Jaga Kita, Migrant Juga Manusia, and all those are quite significant nowadays. And I think that is something that is quite positive to be seen. And moving forward, from the MOU, now that we know the parliament will not be dissolved before the July 31st next year to ensure the political stability. Nevertheless, when we talk about political stability, we must also know that it is often being used by the governments as, what do you mean by political stability? Do you mean that changing the governments will cause instability? I think that particular term is always being misused in the context of whichever side that you're coming from. So how do we drive trust? I think one of the important thing is the trust deficit that we talk about. And when we talk about social movements, civil societies, one question that comes into my mind is, how do you drive trust? I think this is no longer about the governments, and this is also about the durability of the opposition political party, that because trust deficit happen for both sides. It is not only on one side. So as observed, I think the subjects of the relationship of among three entities, Malaysian, such as in the ruling government, the opposition political parties, and the civil society, is still very much widely debated. Though I must say, they are meant to be complement to each other. And there are a few challenges that we can see. For instance, human rights continue to be a sensitive word. Many opt for different words such as social cohesion because they are trying to avoid to talking about ICET. ICET seems to be a taboo nowadays, and I hope in these 5 years, ICET shouldn't be a taboo, because there should be more understanding about what is the international human rights treaties, what's the state obligations, and so forth. And before I close this thing, I would also like to talk about, when it comes to social movement and civil society, there is a need to bridge the old and the new groups. That's why I refrain myself to say that, it's only the youth group, but I think the new and the old should be joining force together, because there are many things to learn. And I think in these 5 years, the civil society, I must say, civil society never ceased from this country. But I will say the role of the media is very important. I think our media is quite selective in picking up what kind of news that they want to put up on their front page and so forth. And I think that brings to my last point, that I think working with the media is very important. And if we talk about, I think among the civil society, we talk so much about, putting up the narratives. But what kind of narratives? How are you going to push for the narratives? I think one of the effective way can be working with the media, apart from there are so many other suggestions about working on with the grassroots levels and things like that. So that's all I would like to share today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ying Hooi, for your inputs. I guess it's very interesting because when you mentioned about the shrinking democratic spaces, right? Because like Dr. Prema, she went back all the way to Ops Lalang, when we can observe the violence happen directly, like for example, through the usage of ISA. And then after that, with Bersih, in Bersih 1 or Bersih 2, we can see the violence happen directly. But then after that, we can see a different trend of how they actually control the civic spaces by using different legislation. So maybe you can actually elaborate more further, maybe later in our discussion as well about that. So, and of course, we also have questions about trust deficit. Maybe you can have a look at that as well. Maybe you can respond maybe later. So moving forward to our last panel, Professor Terence Gomez, I guess the recent Ilham Center survey is quite interesting, where they mentioned that, for the Malays, they don't really care about the democratic issues in Malaysia. What they care is the bread and butter issues. So it's very interesting because we can see that we are moving from democratization to a much more economic perspective of the discussion, right? So maybe if you want to bridge those discussion, it would be great. So yeah, the floor is yours, Prof. Terence, please.
Thank you, Zikri. Let me share some slides which I have for today. Okay, you can see the slide. Now, I want to thank Aliran for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to discuss what Zikri asked me to talk on: public policies, situated within the context of Malaysia's political economy. I want to start with the coup, the Sheraton coup. The Sheraton coup was a defining moment because until then we were thinking of the beginning of a new Malaysia where we would see a lot of changes as outlined in the manifesto. Undoubtedly, Mahathir, when he took over, he said manifestos don't matter. What we did see was when Mahathir took over with Pakatan was the capture of the state by all elites, new government with all elites, Mahathir, Daim Zainuddin, Muhyiddin. That could also explain some of the reasons why we didn't get to see many of the changes we had expected from the Pakatan. But let's move forward to Perikatan, the coup. The coup is important because it happened at the same time as the COVID pandemic. And when the COVID pandemic occurred, I'd like to take you to what Tunku Zafrul, as finance minister, said at that time. Here we were confronted with a pandemic. It had caused a national lockdown. All companies were asked to close, and we were sitting at home. Who was going to save the economy? And at that time, Tunku Zafrul drew reference to what he called the government ecosystem. So what exactly is this government ecosystem? So here you are. The reason why I'm putting up these slides is so that you get an understanding of some of these concepts used by the government. When he talked about the government ecosystem, he was actually talking about the government-linked companies. Now, government-linked companies is a general term, but they constitute the government-linked investment companies, statutory bodies, foundations, development financial institutions like SME Bank, special purpose vehicles. You can see them all here. And he said he's going to use this. And if you remember, you will remember this, soon after the pandemic occurred, they introduced a stimulus package. And they said they're going to use the banks. No more, there will be a moratorium on loans. The GLC banks put a moratorium on loans. Tenaga announced that they will reduce the rates for consumption of electricity supply. And we all felt that the telecommunications company were going to move in because we're all working from home. And that too would be a reduced expense for us. So you could see that there was this government ecosystem that could work. And it did. For a while, we were quite happy with the Muhyiddin government in the sense that it did give, it was a responsive government to the pandemic. And we even saw a reduction in the rates of COVID cases. But then, not long later, what did Muhyiddin do? In the same government ecosystem to consolidate his political position, which was so shaky, he said he's going to, first create the largest cabinet in Malaysian history, which he promptly did. And then he announced that these GLCs, which have a lot of directorships, were going to be given to MPs. A complete abuse of this government ecosystem. And then the decline occurred. As you will remember, from then onwards, we began to see a whole slew of problems. There were allegations of impropriety in the way in which some of the GLCs, especially those in the pharmaceutical sector, were used. The COVID pandemic was such that the pharmaceutical companies were supposed to provide a mechanism of relief. There were allegations of serious allegations there. What about the private hospitals, which were also GLC hospitals? How come they were not being used? A whole slew of questions emerged. But the inability of this government, the last government, to act was most clearly seen when the Prasarana crisis occurred. And when the chairman, an MP no less, spoke about the crisis, it exposed the level of incompetency in the previous government. An opportunity to bring about change, to use this government ecosystem effectively, had been lost. But there was something else that Muhyiddin did, which I feel we must discuss today, which is very important. He talked about the shared prosperity vision. The shared prosperity vision is Muhyiddin's plan. Although it was introduced under the Pakatan government, it was actually Muhyiddin's plan with his think tank called MASA. And what he did was, this Pakatan government, which promised us in the manifesto no more race-based policies, immediately backtracked and introduced the shared prosperity vision, which was a race-based policy. And it was promptly adopted by the Perikatan government. What is interesting is, if you compare the SPV with the NEP, and I put it up here so that you can see it, there's hardly any difference. SPV talks about development for all. In the NEP, it's about reducing poverty regardless of ethnic ethnicity. SPV talks about addressing the wealth and income inequalities, and NEP talks about restructuring society. And both of them talked about national unity. What was the change? A new government with old ideas, repeating old rhetoric, racialized rhetoric. And this was problematic. But there was another issue, which is also important, which I want to bring to your attention. We need to discuss this very carefully because it talks about our future in the economy, the rise of China. Now, you will remember in the run-up to the 2018 election, Mahathir talked about China quite a bit. And when he talked about China, he talked about the need to watch what China was doing in the Malaysian economy, and rightly so, because he was referring to this. He was referring to this where China had already made great inroads into the Malaysian economy. When the COVID pandemic occurred, what is also interesting is one of the first countries to recover very quickly from it was China. And China also began introducing its Belt Road Initiative. The Belt Road Initiative, a key country in implementing the Belt Road Initiative. The Belt Road Initiative, at the center of it was Malaysia. To connect the railway lines, the sea lines, Malaysia was at the center of it, and Malaysia promptly jumped on board. Najib took us on board. The best example of a crisis involving the China-Malaysia links was the ECRL. But there were other problems too. We had other problematic projects that were going on. What change occurred after Pakatan took over? Has China become even more important in the Malaysian economy today? Yes. As you can see, it's also into Sarawak and Sabah. They're moving into Sarawak in a big way. China's entry into Malaysia, what does it mean for domestic enterprises? Now, I'm saying this to you because we have to talk about the implications of this also in terms of public policy. And here, I want to come back to the SPV. When Muhyiddin talked about the SPV, when they introduced the SPV, they said that it was to bring about equitable redistribution of wealth. Now, here's the figure from the SPV document. And I want to share this with you because this clearly indicates one very problematic issue. If you look at this figure, you will find that let's just look at communities, Bumiputras. When they started off in 1970, it was only 2.4%. The high point, one could argue, was in 2011, 23.4. And since then, it has been falling. It has been falling. So Bumiputra capital has fallen significantly. Look at Chinese and Indian capital. It was about 29% in 1970. The high point was in 1990. And then you begin to see a decline. And look at the volume of equity owned by non-Bumiputras in 2015. It is almost similar to what was in 1970. So what we are seeing here is that all Malaysians are falling behind. Who is gaining? And here we can see that who is gaining is foreign capital. And who exactly is this foreign capital? We come back to the rise of China and China's involvement in the Malaysian economy. Now, I'm saying this all to you because these are important issues. Look at this table very carefully before we start talking about differences between ethnic groups and one ethnic group having more capital than the other. It's not true. Everyone is falling behind. What are the government's policies to deal with this? So this brings me now to the new government that was just formed. UMNO is back. We are where we are today because we are having all these problems, which I just mentioned, because it was by UMNO. And UMNO, during those 2 years when they were in the political wilderness, hardly changed. If you look at other single dominant parties that fell, if you look at the Kuomintang, for example, in Taiwan, when they fell, they went through a significant reform and they came back to power. Much changed. Have we seen this change in UMNO? They're now back in power. This brings me to the MOU, which they just signed. MOU has been signed, an MOU on transformation and recovery, which is between, between the current government and Pakatan, just Pakatan parties. If you look at the MOU, and Ying Hooi talked about it at length, so I won't get into it. There are some good things there, don't get me wrong. Who can complain about parliamentary reform? So I think this is very important. Who can complain about the fact that they're going to institute the anti-hopping law? Who can complain about the fact that Undi 18 is now going to be implemented immediately? Who can complain when they say there should be a term limit for the Prime Minister, maximum 10 years, 2 terms? These are all good. And who will say no to a Parliamentary Services Act being instituted immediately, because they have completely decimated Parliament. So we do need a Parliamentary Services Act, which we had in 1963, and then they took it away in 1992. It's about time they brought it back. So I say good to you on that. Having said all that, let's go on to the next point. What is missing? And here I have some concerns. Let me start first with this diagram. I come back to this government ecosystem. Now, the first thing the new government did was they reappointed the old finance minister. Tunku Zafrul is back as finance minister. Tunku Zafrul, just before the Muhyiddin government collapsed, said he introduced the Pekuko initiative. The Pekuko initiative meant that they were going to reform the system and use it far more effectively, because the COVID crisis is prolonged, extremely prolonged. We don't know how long more this is going to happen. The domestic firms, the private firms are on their knees. 95% of the corporate sector are SMEs. They are on their knees. You have to use this. Now, if they're going to use this and they're going to introduce the Pekuko, what are the reforms really that they're going to do with Pekuko? Will this also mean that all political appointments will be removed from among, will we now see politicians not being appointed to the boards? Will we be seeing professionals taking charge of this system? This brings me to the next point under the MOU, which they talked about. They said they're going to have a National Recovery Council. This is very good. I'm glad you're going to have a National Recovery Council. And they said under the MOU, 50% of the National Recovery Council will constitute technocrats, people from the private sector and the public sector who are not politicians. The remaining 50% will be equally divided between the opposition and the current government. Fine. Will they be independent enough to ensure that this government ecosystem is now going to intervene in the economy in a way in which will bring about benefits for the Malaysian economy and for the Malaysian people? Will this government ecosystem also be used to ensure that foreign enterprises, I'm very worried about China and how they're intervening into our economy and taking over our supply chains, will they be able to monitor that properly? I haven't seen any discussions on this. Or will we see a continued nexus of politics and business with this government ecosystem? It is interesting that there was no discussion about this in the MOU. Why? If you go to the state governments, Selangor, Penang, Kelantan, Sabah, Sarawak, you will see a similar GLC system. Even in Selangor, they have a GLC system like this. And it's controlled by Minister of Finance Incorporated or Menteri Besar Incorporated. The best example of this when this became a controversy was just last month, the Kuala Langat crisis. And who was at the center of it? Menteri Besar Incorporated of Selangor, controlled by the Chief Minister. We have similar GLC systems in the respective states. And here's the problem. In 2018, when we had a change, when we had a monumental change in our political system, of the 13 state governments, 8 of these state governments were controlled by different parties. What that meant was 8 different political parties in this country were controlling state governments and had control of a similar GLC system just like this. And they didn't want to reform it. Have you heard of any politician from any spectrum, either opposition or from the current government or from Sabah or from Sarawak, talking about reforming this system? This is a shadow world. They control it. How will they use it? No discussion in the MOU on this matter. What happened to the discussion on political financing? Prema mentioned just now that next year we're going to have an election. They said, okay, we will not have any election until the end of July. There will be no talk of election so that till we get these things right. But what about political financing? Is this a time also to fill up their coffers, to ensure that they have sufficient money in their coffers before they go into this election? There's been a lot of discussion of political financing because it was linked to the infamous 1MDB scandal. What was it about the 1MDB scandal? Foreign funding. 2.6 billion money entered into the accounts of the former prime minister. who then promptly distributed it to his party members to use in the 2018 election. And that's what we know. What about the political financing systems that we know nothing about? That's another covert world. Why is it when there was a lot of discussions about political financing, there was no discussion about this in the MOU? There are many things that they were silent about in this MOU. And the third thing, which is important, we must talk about, why didn't this MOU talk about institutional dysfunctionality? Parliament was in a state of complete dysfunctionality. We must change it. Very good. What about the Election Commission? Why was there no discussion on the Election Commission? Don't we want an independent Election Commission in the run-up to when we have the next election? Are we sure that the Election Commission is really independent? Of course, the opposition may say we couldn't get everything we wanted. This was a compromise. I'm willing to accept that, but I have to be a skeptic here because I'm not totally convinced that we are seeing everything in the public domain. Ying Hooi talked about the trust deficit. I'm afraid I have that trust deficit too with all politicians at the moment. And I'm questioning this. So where do we go from here? Ismail Sabri said, we are going to have a Keluarga Malaysia. When he said Keluarga Malaysia, I was reminded by something Ismail Sabri's mentor had said. Ismail Sabri's mentor is Najib Razak. What did Najib Razak said at a time of crisis? One Malaysia. You all remember One Malaysia. It was promptly forgotten after 2013, when he went on to introduce race-based policies like the Bumiputra Economic Empowerment Policy, which he then said the GLCs will implement. Keluarga Malaysia, One Malaysia, they sound very similar to me, and both coming from UMNO leaders. What about the 12th Malaysia Plan? At the end of September, at the end of this month, they're going to table the 12th Malaysia Plan. That is the plan for the next 5 years. Will the SPV ideas, which are very racialized in its discourse, be a constituent dimension of the 12th Malaysia Plan? If it is, how is this a Keluarga Malaysia document? So I am telling you now what to expect in the coming months. Be prepared. Monitor the 12th Malaysia Plan. Will the 12th Malaysia Plan be a Keluarga Malaysia Plan, or will it be another of those divisive, racialized public policies that we have been seeing of past from our politicians? Next month, in October, at the end of the month, we will see the budget. What kind of budget will this be? Will this budget, last year when they introduced the budget, we thought this was going to be an extraordinary budget. Why? Because we were dealing with a pandemic. It had to be an extraordinary budget. And what did we get? We got in a budget which everyone described as an election budget. Will we get another election budget? Now the MOU, which was signed by both sides, said, the opposition, Pakatan said it, they're going to monitor the budget. There's going to be a discussion on the budget. That's good. And I hope Pakatan will monitor the budget to make sure that the funds will go where they should go. How will the government fund the health system? How will they fund the education system, which is also in tatters? These are things we need to watch. I would like to close here with this. We are now in a situation, a dire situation, economically as well as politically. I've already shown you the problems that we are now confronted with. With this alliance, this MOU that has just been signed, will there now be a moment of, well, peace, if you like, coming together to really look forward to working together to find ways to move forward in a way in which these politicians work to help Malaysia recover from this pandemic. That is what we have to watch for. I'm not holding my breath, but I will say this to everyone. We have a role to play. I like what Prema said. Civil society has to come up. We Malaysians have to stand up and speak up on these issues because we have to hold this government accountable for what has happened over the past 2 years. Both sides have failed us deeply. It is now for civil society to stand up and to hold them accountable and rectify these problems that we are now seeing in Malaysia's political economy. Thank you, Zikri.
All right, thank you so much for that, Professor Terence. I guess, of course, when you mentioned about institutionalized dysfunctionality, I guess that's what we are facing for almost like 60 years. I guess our generation in a different ways have actually faced that, you know. So it's good that you're actually bringing that back into the discussion right now. It's actually, of course, when we discuss about all of this, it gives us like a very grim outlook of the future. But then again, it's always about how can we actually maneuver, how can we actually negotiate this kind of possibilities as well. So yeah, thank you so much for that, because it's actually helped to encapsulate different different topics that have been shared by our panelists tonight. For example, with Dr. Azmil about the ethnocentric and of course the development that happens in Malaysia for the recent years, and of course like with Dr. Prema and also Dr. Ying Hooi about how civil society have to play their roles, and of course when you mentioned about the dysfunctionalities that we are facing as a society. So but then again, we also have like, I guess maybe like 6 or 7 different questions here tonight, so it's quite vibrant. But then again, I guess I have to how to say, like kumpul it, you know, like to collect it together in order for us to have a very much centralized kind of discussion. So as you can see in the chat box, I guess maybe one of the most significant questions from our listeners tonight is basically about the question of the third force. So as you can see, like one of them actually saying that, oh, PSM with the first past the post system are not being able to actually to gain any traction, you know, to provide any possibilities of providing alternative because of the systems that we have. The electoral system doesn't allow them to thrive. So even one of them actually questions like, oh, is the third force is a viable alternative in our situation right now? Because if we actually have like a different political parties beyond the dominant coalition that we have right now, do they actually can play a role? For example, maybe in the last article published in Aliran, we did one of the writers actually mentioned about on how the Borneo-based coalition actually plays an interesting role as a kingmaker as well. Maybe they can be the third force there, but then again, maybe I would love to hear more from our panelists as well. And then the question about the vacuum of the third force when Pakatan Harapan actually gain power, when they actually gain power, that's a huge vacuum that has been left by them as well. So maybe if maybe Dr. Prema or Dr. Ying Hooi would love to respond on the question of third force before we move forward to different questions about the risk of ethnopolitics and ethno-identity. Maybe Dr. Azmil would love to discuss more on that, and maybe later I would collect the question for Professor Terence as well. So yeah, please, if there's anyone like Dr. Prema or Dr. Ying Hooi would love to respond on the third force questions first, then we can move forward to Dr. Azmil and then Prof. Terence later. Yeah. Anyone?
Okay, let me say a few words on the third force.
Sure.
I do know there's a lot of discussions going on about the third force. I know, Zikri, you posed a question to the other two, but let me, since I'll just get into this quickly.
Sure.
I'm worried about the third force emerging in the sense that I like the idea. I like to see a new kind of political actors. I like to see a younger generation coming in and being more active. The reason I brought up political financing as a big issue is because political financing has meant that it's not just about what's happening during the general and state level elections. It's what's happening during party elections. Those with money always win in the party elections, and then they get re-nominated for all the seats. And that's why you don't see a change of guard. And this is particularly true in UMNO. You will see similar money politics being used in elections in PKR in the last elections that they had. So it's now not just in the Barisan Nasional type parties, but also in the opposition type parties. Now, this can stymie the young from coming forward. So I'm glad to see that we have a new young force coming up among young people. But my concern is when we get into 3-cornered fights or 4-cornered fights, you split the votes. And when you split the votes, who normally wins? And unfortunately, I feel that that's why, again, come back to political financing. Do they have even the new third force? Will they have sufficient resources to go and do the mobilization work? Will they have the money to set up the political machinery that is required to go and campaign? Do they have the money to do the media campaign that they require, to hire the staff that they need? This is why the Political Financing Act is a very important act if we want to have a viable third force. They have not put up a Political Financing Act to allow for this third force to also emerge. And even if they do emerge, there's the second issue, as I said, can they split the votes? Will they split the votes? Those are things we need to also think about. So let me stop there. I just wanted to put these few thoughts on the board for us to consider.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, Dr. Prema, please.
I was just thinking that, in the next elections, if people are as fed up as they are with the current set of politicians, there might be a chance that, there could be a protest vote and people would just vote for an alternative candidate. So you could see something like that happening. But however, if you get someone like that coming into parliament, then very much as an independent, and how they would survive in the parliamentary system then is a whole nother area. So yeah, that's the comment.
Yeah, I just would like to add on to what have been discussed. And I think what Terence responded just now is valid. I think that has been always the reality that many Malaysians have put up. What if we have 3-corner fight and things like that in the general elections? Nevertheless, if I look at it in a different perspective, is that if we don't push that to move forward, because the third force debates is not new. It has been there for a long time. And I would say third force is not referring to only the young group. That's why just now I mentioned there's a need for the bridging of the new and the old. Basically, is the third force is another group that can act as a check on because our Malaysian politics is so divided between either you're with the government or you're with the opposition, as simple as that. And I think we do really need to push that a little bit, but what the problems lies behind this is that there's also very little trust to the third force, and especially if we talk about the youth groups, there's so little trust to the youth group as well. People think that, like muda and so forth, I think this is related to culture because of, such a long decades of the Barisan Nasional with that I think one of the questions talking about personalized politics, and I think we have these issues of personalities politics as well. So that particular figure has to be so established, otherwise there will be no chance. But I think we in the civil society should push that a little bit, and hence that's why I started off with my presentation that democratization can be very messy, and it is going to be very, very messy. But I would like to see our country to move beyond only 2 coalitions, and I think that is not healthy. Hence, I also mentioned about the terminology of political stabilities. That has been the mindset of people that, you have one that is very stable, the economic perhaps will be good, but that itself open up to many other issues like corruptions and things like that. So I think something has to change within that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ying Hooi, and also Dr. Prema and Prof. Terence earlier for your inputs on the questions of the third force. But then again, I remember, like, in your discussion earlier, Dr. Ying Hooi, you mentioned about the possibilities of people power. You still believe in it, right? Like, but then again, there's one question about it, like, how can we go beyond the electoral politics, for example, in order for us to reassert like a true change that is possible for our context. Yeah, so maybe you would love to address that question as well. Yeah.
Well, I think our democratization process is very young, and the process is very long. Hence, that's why just now when I answered that, I think my response to the third, fourth questions basically has identified these issues that we have. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ying Hooi, for that. And then in relation to Prof. Terence Gomez a discussion earlier about how the economic realignment in Malaysia has always been tied into those Malay-centric Bumiputra kind of configuration, right, in Malaysia. So that's how it's very much harder for us to push through any real reform. But then again, maybe I would love to expand the question further. Is it only the Malay-centric configuration that actually negate the possibility of change within the current government setup? For example, how do you perceive like different forms of like for example the chronic capitalism that we are having right now, and of course the role of different entities in that configuration? So how do you see the possibilities for us to push through, you know, this kind of ethnocentric economic configuration in Malaysia? Because maybe from there, Dr. Azmil can respond as well, because ethnocentric social system that we are having right now is very much embedded with the economic configuration system that we have as well. So maybe we can have more discussion on that. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe I can, excuse me.
Sure.
And just comment a bit, because I think we can also tie this, more this ethnic centric policies, into electoral competition and things like the third force that we've discussed earlier. Because I think they're all intertwined, or can be made to be intertwined. First, I think just going back to the third force, I think there's a good reason for this distrust, right? Because we've seen throughout the Malaysian history, the third force, quote unquote third force, they're offshoot of an existing political party, right? So you have even PAS is an offshoot of UMNO, right? If you look at history, and then you have Semangat 46, and then you have even Amanah was an offshoot of PAS. And now you have Pejuang, you have Muda, so it's with good reason that people eye them with suspicion, because they're seen as a vehicle for certain, disaffected, disgruntled political elites who looking, to kind of carve their own, trying to still assert their influence, or maintain their power, so to speak. So I think short of electoral reform, which I think we've heard a lot from like Prof. Wong Chin Huat, for example, like proposing all these different types of, mixed member constituency and all these things, the German model and all this, I think it should be, definitely part of the parliamentary agenda. We seriously need to reform our electoral system, to make it more equitable and more representative. But I think what it can do, for the time being, is just to focus on, bread and butter issues, just simply to move. Things that concern people regardless of their ethnicity, race, religion, and we can see from Terence table just now, right? The ownership of these corporations, now it's not just the Malays are losing out, but the Chinese, the Indians, and you can see the foreigners are actually gaining like almost half, right, of this ownership, like 45% in 2015, right? So it's like we're going back to the pre-independence day, so when there's so much effort have been made, since independence to reduce foreign ownership, right? And then to increase Malaysian ownership. And then later on, after NEP became Malay ownership, right? But I think in terms of the discourse, the narrative, we're still stuck in this 1970s, era where, it's only the Malays that are getting left behind. But the fact of the matter is, as shown in that table, seeing that all of us, all Malaysians are being left behind, and I think that, and then that should be part of this political discourse that we have right now. And one, I think when you look at this kind of, the ethno-religious controversies, at the heart of it is bread and butter issues. I think that's this, it's easier for people to vent out to find this ethno-religious outlet, to vent out their frustration. But when you look at it, like actually the root of the problem is bread and butter issues, right? I mean, socioeconomic issues. So it's class issue, for example, it's the elites versus the non-elites, the capitalists versus the workers. These are the things that should be focused, we should be focusing on, and political parties should be focusing on, instead of whipping up, support through fear and emotions, and things like that. So I think it all goes hand in hand. I think like to show that at the heart of it, is this bread and butter issue. And I remember the famous quote, right? By President Bush, like, it's the economy, stupid, right? So I think it should, I mean, that's what it is, and all these things are just, they're all distractions, because it's so much harder to reform and to, to focus on, to make significant changes in the economic structure. And like Terence also shown, that ecosystem, right? And see, even in opposition states, you have the similar ecosystem, right? And we can see like like most of Aliran will live in Penang, right? We can see that, the chief minister incorporated, so these are all the things that need to be reformed. So I'll pass on to other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azmil, for that insights for us to move forward with the discussion. I guess it's very interesting when you compare with the situation during the pre-colonial period in Malaysia, and of course, like what happened right now. It seems that it's the same modus operandi that we are facing right now, but then again, it's a much larger impact to the situation in Malaysia right now. So of course, it also has its own geopolitical dimension to it, like what have been mentioned by Dr. Terence about how China is actually having its own ideas about how they want to not only control but also navigate the resources that we have in this country. So maybe from there you can pick up the discussion which has been left by Dr. Azmil earlier, Prof. Terence, please.
I'd like to start first by just commenting on a few points made by the other panelists. Ying Hooi talked about the democratization process being young. She made a very good point. We have long been an authoritarian state. The process of democratization began in 2018 when New Malaysia was formed, but it quickly crumbled. Now, if you look at other countries that have gone through a period from moving from authoritarian rule to democratization, you will find similar things happen. Look at what happened in Indonesia soon after the Reformasi occurred. And look how long it took them to consolidate democracy. One thing is the transition. The next stage is consolidation. Look at how many presidents they had before they finally managed to consolidate democracy. Look at the Philippines. Philippines went through a transition through the people power movement. Look how long it was characterized by a lot of problems in the Philippines before they finally managed to consolidate democracy. What we are going through now is something similar, and we must be prepared for that. Having said that, what is also our problem? And the problem also with regards to the third force and what whoever wants to bring about change, what are they confronted with? And here the point made by Azmil is very important, the electoral system. Look at the gerrymandering and the malapportionment. we got to do something about the gerrymandering and the malapportionment. The malapportionment is such that most of the constituencies are in the Malay heartland states. They are small as opposed to the urban states, which are really huge in numbers. Just compare the largest constituency in, say, Kuala Lumpur with some in Kedah, for example, or Perlis, and then you know what I mean. We need to have a real proper restructuring of the constituencies to bring about fairer electoral system. All this will take time and should be instituted quickly. Now, having said all that, I want to move on to Azmil's point, the bread and butter issues. I agree, we have to start talking about that. Look at the structure of the economy today. If you look at the Malaysian economy, I showed you all the government ecosystem, which is huge, but mind you, if you look at the corporate sector, 98.5% of the corporate sector are SMEs. And among these SMEs, a majority of them, 80% of them, are micro firms. Micro firms meaning less than 5 employees. We have a major structural problem in our economy. And what of the companies, the informal sector, the companies that are not registered? There's a huge informal sector. Now, all these people are suffering with this crisis. Who in government and how, through the government resources that we have, including through this government ecosystem, are we going to reach out and help them? We have the resources, that's my argument. We know it. We have the development financial institutions, SME Bank, Agro Bank, Bank Pembangunan. We have the other GLC banks which can also come in, that can help us bring this about. We have the statutory bodies, Kesedah, Ketengah, all embedded in the rural areas to help the fishery sector, to help the agriculture sector. If we just use it properly, it's turning out to be a boon. We used to be so critical of it. It's turning out to be a boon if you use it properly. But there doesn't seem to be that attention, that focus on using this government ecosystem to save the economy. Now, I come back to the SMEs. 98.5% of them, as I said, we have 1.2 million companies, 98.5% of them are SMEs, about 900,000 of them are SMEs. Half of them, it has already been predicted, half of them are going to fail very soon. That is going to mean an escalation in terms of non-performing loans. The bankruptcies are going to go up. Non-performing loans will then go up. Unemployment will go up. What are we going to do to help these people who will then be unemployed? How are we going to deal with the non-performing loans? These are all very serious issues, which is going to happen in the very near future. That is why I said, watch out for the budget. Watch out for the 12 Malaysia plan. How are we going to deal with this pandemic? It's definitely going to be prolonged. Who is going to intervene and save the economy? It has to be the government. There's no doubt about it. And other countries where we have seen, which are highly interventionist, have done well. And I'll give you 2 examples. One example is China, of course, highly interventionist. The other example is Singapore. Singapore also has a huge GLC system and they've intervened quite effectively. You can look at what happened in Singapore to see how they intervened effectively. Look at how China intervened to build hospitals, for example, how they intervened to deal with the pandemic quickly. And they seem to have recovered quite well. There's something to be said about a government ecosystem, if well deployed, that can be used to deal with a crisis of the sort that we are now confronted with. But is this new government equipped to do it? Are they even looking at it? Or are they focusing on political power consolidation before they move into the next general election? I fear it's on the latter. Their focus is really on power consolidation, generating enough revenue funds to fight the next election, trying to stay in power as long as possible so that they can use the government's extensive resources, not for the rakyat, but for their own vested interests. This is what we have to watch out for. And how will they divert our attention from the GLCs and this ecosystem? Ethno-religious dialogue. Azmil made the point. Continuous racialized discourses to continue to divide the people. I looked at the questions and I saw people are quite unaware about these GLCs. Yeah, there's a question here, what is this Pekuko? The Pekuko plan is very important because it was announced by Tunku Zafrul just last month. It was headlines saying that they're going to reform the GLCs because they have to use the EPF better. They have to use PNB better. They have to use KWAP and all these other institutions and Khazanah in a far better way. And that's just the top GLICs. What about those below? The reason why there's not enough attention on the GLC world is because it's such a complex shadow world. People don't understand the shadow world. And yet now it's being acknowledged by the government. This is the mechanism to save the economy. So we have to become well aware what this GLC system is. We didn't show it to us very well. He came in, he used the GLCs to save the economy initially through the stimulus packages. And then he also showed us how it can be used politically. And then everything goes all right thereon. If they had not abused the GLCs, we probably would have been in a better state. So let me end here so you know the issues we need to grapple with in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It is very interesting when you mentioned that we really have to look at the 12th RMK, Rancangan Malaysia ke-12, so that we are aware of what really happened next. So maybe we're going to collect some of the questions, like maybe another 2 questions here from Charles Hector. Watching opposition MPs in Parliament, we see criticism but no suggestion of alternative things that ought to be done. The fact that media reports on what is happening in Parliament is so few indicates that no one is raising significant matters that are worthy of media attention. Yeah, and then the second one would be from Rizal Wong. The main problem of all these politicians are very opportunists, be it in government or opposition. They just want power. No proper plan is made to ensure it is riot-based, socio-economic, etc., etc. Every time that they come out is to be in power. I guess this is how to say, like, it does amplify what we have been saying about the politician with their allurement of power. Once they get power, it's like they really know how to use it to their gain, for example. But then again, it really depends on us on how are we going to navigate, and of course to dissect the structure of power, what have been mentioned by the Prof. Terence earlier about how GLC is very much a very complex shadow world, of which when you mentioned about Pekoko and all, of course, like we are not aware of it, but for me, like I have to go through and really go back and read about it further. And then just I guess, do we have any more questions, or maybe if there's any of our panelists would love to respond or want to emphasize further their points, would be good as well. If there's
I want to bring up the point about holding the government accountable. I think there was a question about it doesn't seem to be working very much in Parliament, trying to hold the government accountable. But I think there are other ways in which the government can be held accountable, depending on the issues. So I think recently, a group of women took, had a case in court over nationality issues and basically challenging the discrimination in the law. So, you are holding, in that sense, they are holding the government accountable to commitments they have made on an international level at CEDAW. So you can use that method, you can go through the courts. I think in Penang State, recently there was a Department of Environment revoking as part of the Penang's reclamation land, reclamation, so that there was an appeals board. And so there are different ways you can hold state governments and the federal government accountable. So even during the COVID-19, when there was all these double standards where people were alleging that, politicians were allowed to go out, but ordinary people were having to pay huge fines. And because civil society spoke up through their TikTok videos, through their, comments on social media, the leaders, because they knew of their position and they were losing, popularity, they have to behave themselves. So I still think it goes back to ordinary people, civil society, making these points, making these points about corruption, making these points about double standards, making these points all the time. Because if we just solely rely on Parliament to hold the government accountable, then what happens if they decide not to suspend parliament again? Then for how many months does everybody just keep quiet? So I think civil society does have a major role to play in keeping issues alive and in asking the questions. If you can't ask it in parliament, then you have to ask it outside. Yeah.
Can I respond to, oh, sorry, someone else wants to speak. Can I respond to Hector's comment, which Hector has raised the point that we are not given any alternatives. That's a good point that he has raised, but let me also say this. Interpret what we are saying. I was asked to speak on Malaysia's political economy and policies. I only focused my attention on that. I gave a very clear diagram of the government ecosystem. I made it very clear this needs to be reformed. I said this is a shadow world. Bring it out into the light. Look at it carefully and see how we can restructure it. I clearly stated if we reform this world well, we can save the economy. They are not paying attention to this world and they're keeping it in the shadows so that we Malaysians don't know about it. But look at this world. The banking system is there. Look at the health sector. It's there. They've even got private hospitals there. They've got telecommunications there. They've got the utilities there. You name it, they have it there. The only thing that they're not really there in is in technology. But in all other sectors of the economy, including fisheries, agriculture, they have it there. Why aren't they using this system properly? Why aren't they reforming it and applying it effectively? I just said, look at China, look at Singapore and how they use that same ecosystem so effectively to deal with the pandemic. That is a suggestion that is being made to the government. Now, we have to ask the question. I agree with Hector also on this point. The media is not picking this up. They don't seem to understand this world. They're not aware of this world. It's just too complex. But that is the solution. That is the solution we have seen in other countries too. The countries that have done well in terms of trying to deal with the pandemic quickly, effectively, are those which have this kind of government ecosystem. Other countries which have it, or Vietnam. Vietnam has an ecosystem of a similar sort. And look at how they were able to also intervene in the economy quickly. The largest economy in the world very soon will be China, with a government ecosystem exactly similar to what we have. They are going to overtake the private economic system that you see in America. So who is to say that this government ecosystem is really just corruption, patronage, rent-seeking, and nothing more? Not necessarily true. If used effectively, it can bring about economic growth. If used effectively, they can rechannel resources equitably. If used effectively, they can bring about gross wealth and income disparities in this country. But we are not using it. And another reason why people are hesitant to talk about this GLC is because it's long been abused. UMNO abused it whole scale. All the major corruptions that we have, Tabung Haji, Mara, 1MDB, you name it, they're all GLCs. So why? Their solution, privatize. Who are you going to privatize to? That's my question. Are you going to privatize all our national assets to rich people because only they have the money to buy it? What about the poor? What about the lower middle income people? Simple solutions like this are not the panacea. We cannot play pucks with this government ecosystem. That's why the Pakuko plan, it was an acknowledgement that they have to reform. But we are not paying attention to this. I'm just referring to that because that was the domain in which I was asked to speak, political economy. If you ask me to speak more, I want to talk about education. I've got a lot of ideas on educational reform. Our whole education system is a mess. I should know. I'm the university. I've seen what the problems we have in the universities. I'm sure Azmil will have a lot to say on this too. But what about primary and secondary education? What about the curriculum? What about e-learning, e-teaching? What about the digital? I didn't speak on the digital economy. They talked about the digital blueprint, which was just released. An important document we must look at, the digital blueprint. because we're becoming a highly digitalized economy. COVID has forced us to become highly digitalized very quickly. How are we going to do it? There's a lot to discuss, and unfortunately, we don't have enough time to discuss all these things. I'm confining myself just to one point. I would like to talk off all these other issues, but unfortunately, we can't get into it. So, to Hector, please be patient. I'm sure Aliran will organize another talk like this where we can get into the details of these issues. So let me end here, Zikri.
Yeah. Sorry, you already finished with the point?
I'm finished.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So I guess maybe just to, of course, like we no longer have any questions from the floor, but then again, there's another question, I guess, that will help for us to navigate our closing remarks, which on question 10, if you see on the chat box, what should we do to magnify, propagate, and amplify to move forward to another level of maturity in all aspects? I guess this question actually help us to close the discussion. So maybe everyone can actually have like 3 minutes or 4 minutes to respond on what can we do together in our respective field of expertise or field of interest in order for us to move forward. Please. Maybe Dr. Azmil can go first, and then the Prema and Ying Hooi, and last would be Prof. Terence, please. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much to our moderator Zikri, and also to those who attended the talk tonight. So like I said, we need to move away, to transition away from the ethno-religious politics that is so dominant in Malaysia, to more programmatic based politics, right? So obviously there's a role of political parties there to promote this kind of more bread and butter, more programmatic, and more ideological in a way, like focusing on the material needs, right? And also just to to add on to what Prema mentioned, so the role of civil society as well, particularly in public education, particularly in changing the way that the public think about certain issues. I like to also go back to the example that Prema used, the Penang Southern Reclamation campaign, right? Because when you look at the affected area, a majority of them are Malay fishermen, right? So, and then, this issue can be easily racialized, which actually, I mean, there are people who actually try to racialize this issue, making it into, Chinese developers, the Chinese, DAP state government versus, taking advantage, exploiting the poor Malay fishermen, making it, into this, the racialized discourse. But with the hard work, the relentless campaign done by various civil society groups, especially, and our lovely Dila was part of the Penang Tolak Tambak campaign. There are all these people, even the fishermen themselves, I mean, tried very hard to get out of this racialized discourse. This has nothing to do with Malay versus Chinese. This is about the state government in bed with developers, trying to destroy the livelihood of the fishermen there, and destroying the environment in the process, and this project that only benefit very tiny slice of the society. So, and it succeeded. I can see with the EIA, the ruling recently, which give victory to all this hard work that's been done for the past few years. So I think it's definitely possible to move beyond these ethno-religious rhetorics that we see into to focus more on the bread and butter issue. Especially on the class issue, economic, these things are actually transcend, this whatever, identity markers that we have. So I think we should definitely do more, campaigns like the Penang Tolak Tambak and all these things, that you should be scaled up. Okay, so that's my closing remark for tonight. So thank you very much, everyone. And I hope that we can we have opportunity to discuss other issues as well, as Terence mentioned, you know, because there are a variety of problems in Malaysia right now that we have to face, and one webinar is not enough to, you know, to talk about it. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you, Zikri, for holding this all together. Basically, I still believe our country needs to heal, not just from the pandemic, but, you know, from years of ethno-religious rhetoric which has been coming out, you know, the loss of trust. And I think I will go back to the point that we need to move beyond that, which is what Azmil said. And I think each of us has a role to play. It's not just the CSOs, the CSIs, or the politicians, whichever side they're on. And I think it requires for us to look at ourselves, you know, what are we doing, and how we are holding ourselves accountable for a better Malaysia, and how we hold the government, and how we push in different ways, how we can make systems work, or, you know, how we can push for accountability. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I have 3 points, quick points to make. I think the first point is a small proposal that I'd like to make is that let's make our politicians debate. I think we need a debate culture from different sides of the political parties, and I think in the past we've witnessed that politicians always resist from debate policies and so forth publicly. Perhaps this is something that, you know, among the civil societies or perhaps in the media can think of a platform that, you know, we should make them publicly debate in front of the people leading to the general elections, because this has been raised earlier before, but we know there's a resistance. And the second part is related to the role of medias. And I think the media, I guess it is not everything that we read in the media is what is really happening in the countries. So that is an issue that we have. And very often the investigative journalism is not really there. So what we've seen is only on the surface, but not really something in more in depth. So I believe the role of media is very important in activating all this kind of discourse. And my third point, of course, is a reminder for myself as well. I think education is very important. The role of academics is very important. So I would like to raise this to all the academics to continue to speak up in these critical times. And I think it is really the time for the academics to be unified, to stand together, and rather than, you know, when we talk about civil society, we are not talking about only the NGOs, but academics plays a very important part of it. And this is something that all the academics should know and should play the role. Thank you.
I'd like to keep it simple. The key terms or the key concepts for this talk were state, economy, and society. So let me talk on these 3 things. State. First, we were told that we have seen a historic moment in Malaysian politics. An MOU was signed between the opposition and the current ruling government. It's going to be non-partisan. It's going to be people-centered. So let's see it. Let's monitor this. It's very important that we see how this MOU, when it comes to implementation, pans out. Why? Because based on this MOU in Parliament, we're going to see the debates on first, the 12th Malaysia Plan and the budget. So this brings me now to the second theme, economy. When we talk about 12th Malaysia Plan and the budget, we have to pay very close attention to both these issues, because how they pan out will also reflect whether the MOU is really working effectively. Is the MOU working effectively in the sense that the opposition had a big say in the budget to ensure that they come out with a budget that really helps society, people in need? Is this MOU working effectively so that when they have the 12th Malaysia Plan, we will not see any more racialized discourses, but a society where a parent, which they said they want to make a Keluarga Malaysia? Those are the things I'll be looking out for in the debates that are going to pan out from this MOU. They've given us something concrete. So let's work with what the politicians have given us. Let's see what they're going to do in Parliament now. Will they institute the reforms that they said they will? Or is this mere rhetoric? It's not sustainable. We have to watch for that too. And finally, we come to society. What happens in Parliament and how they debate the 12th Malaysia Plan and the budget is very important because, as I said earlier, we are in a very serious economic crisis. The unemployment rates are going to go up, the bankruptcy rates are going up, and we are going to be invaded. We will not be able to confront the FDI that is coming in from China, which can mean the takeover of major segments of our economy. So we have to monitor these three issues very carefully. Safeguard Malaysia and its people. That's a role that we have to play in the coming months. Zikri, I'm done.
All right. Of course, thank you so much to everyone, Prof. Terence, Dr. Azmil, Dr. Ying Hooi, and Dr. Prema, for your kind articulations of the situation that we are facing right now. And of course, like, thank you so much for those who are actually working to run this session to be on time and everything. Thank you, Dila, Anil, Dr. Henry, and Dr. Francis also. Of course, Tian Ang as well. Yeah, and of course, like, thank you so much for the questions and those who are actually tuning in to listen to our discussion tonight. So with that, I'm going to close our session with thank you so much and Selamat Hari Malaysia. Stay safe. Sampai jumpa. Bye-bye.